the religion kind of intrigued me. Just for example, when you see their church buildings, which are called kingdom halls, why don't they have windows on their buildings? Why do they wear suits and ties and knock on people's doors? Just things like that intrigued me, and I knew generally speaking that they had some beliefs that differed from mainstream Christianity. So I really wanted to know from the horse's mouth, what do they believe and why do they believe it? All of our beliefs are based on the Bible. That is what they're going to claim. If you take most of their or all of their core doctrines, including prophecies that were in the end times and things like that, they're all misapplications of Scripture.
This is Seeds of Awakening. I'm your host, Amani Channel. This is your home for higher frequency conversations. And I have to admit, I decided to take things back to my religious roots. So I brought in a great guest who's going to provide a lot of perspective on this religion. You may know about it, you may have heard about it. I think it's going to enlighten a lot of you folks. But first, make sure you like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, help the algorithm find this great content. Smash that like, smash that like, smash that like. Do it now. All right. So I'm bringing Mike Felker. He actually studied Jehovah's Witnesses when he was in college as part of his sociology studies. He has a wealth of information on their doctrines. He actually studied with witnesses for several years, and he was never baptized, but he provides great perspective on their beliefs and on their teachings. So we are joined by Mike Felker now, and he has an interesting story because he wasn't actually raised a Jehovah's Witness, but he spent a lot of years studying the organization. So Mike, thanks so much and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so why don't you just share a little bit about your background? Where are you from and how are you raised?
Well, I currently reside in the Tennessee area. I was actually raised in Georgia, in the Atlanta area, for most of my life, and a couple of years ago, I moved up to Tennessee with my wife. Grew up as far as my religious background, I would say nominally Christian. I went to church every Sunday with my parents, my family, the Methodist church. And then never really took my faith all that seriously, just other than just the regular involvement, like going to Sunday school, going to youth group, things like that. Didn't went to some church camps, but didn't really go beyond that. I didn't really study the Bible, so I would say just generally nominally Christian, and so that's my general background. Didn't really have a lot of family discussions, things like that. Didn't really question my faith all that much. Was never really challenged to do so. Then when I went to college, that's really when I started taking my faith way more seriously, trying to kind of figure out what did I believe and why did I believe it. And a lot of that had to do with being confronted with my faith, just by people I went to class with, people also making friends with, just being asked general questions, whether it's by my professors, by my friends, so on and so forth. And so that just really got me kind of thinking and wanting to kind of figure out what I believe for myself. And to make, I guess, a longer story short, I'm a Christian, and that's my background. That's kind of what I came to believe to be true after just doing some research on it in my early college years, and still doing the same thing to this day.
So when did your interest in Jehovah's Witness faith begin? When did you start getting interest in that study of that religion?
And I had been into just comparative religions just kind of early in my general studies. That was interesting to me, just looking into groups like Islam, Mormonism, and even just more liberal leaning beliefs. Progressive Christianity, things like that. Um, didn't really have any interest or engagement with the witnesses. Later on in my college career, so I was a sociology major. That's what I ended up graduating with. And later on in my years, my degree program, there was a class I took which was called Death in the Afterlife, and so it was a sociological study of death in the afterlife. And one of the main projects for that course was to find a religion other than your own and research the beliefs of that particular religion, specifically as it relates to death and the afterlife. And of course, there's many different groups I could have chosen, and I picked the witnesses for several reasons. One of which I didn't know much about them. The religion I knew generally about them, and so the religion kind of intrigued me. Just for example, when you see their church buildings, which are called kingdom halls, why don't they have windows on their buildings? Why do they wear suits and ties and knock on people's doors? Just things like that intrigued me, and I knew generally speaking that they had some beliefs that differed from mainstream Christianity. So that was one reason, just a general interest. But what separated that from like Mormonism or something else? Well, I knew for my project, I actually had to do interviews with the people from the religion that I chose, and I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, how am I going to find people to interview from another religion? What am I going to do? Well, I knew where the Jehovah's Witnesses like worshiped locally, their kingdom halls. I knew where those were. And so I'm kind of thinking, okay, well, I think I can probably go to their kingdom hall and I can find them and ask them if they wanted to be a part of my research project. And so I did that. I turned in my proposal and it was all good. And so I'll try to like briefly summarize kind of the project itself. And so the project, I'd like write a paper on it. And the paper had a lot to do with, of course, the content of what the JWs believe about death and the afterlife, but also what they actually said in my interviews. And I would ask them questions like, what happens when you die? Or how sure are you that what you say is going to happen will happen? Questions like that. And I published my research, or at least turned in my research. And so, where did that go from there? Well, a lot of these witnesses, and I think I interviewed maybe about I think eight, if I remember right. This was a long time ago. I think around like eight witnesses. And so, after the research was over, every single one of them, they wanted to engage me further.
Mhm.
So that, they kind of viewed it as a little bit of a two-way street. I interview them, but but what's in it for them? So they wanted to not interview, but they wanted to basically talk to me. And so what that led to was engagement with several different Jehovah's Witnesses, and that really lasted for a couple of years. And so I did what's called a book study, where you get one of their publications, and you study that with them. And their publications, they claim to be Bible based, and so they would say we're doing a Bible study, but in reality it's a book study, studying their publications. And so did that for a couple of years. And this is right around when YouTube kind of started to be a thing, and I was just kind of thinking to myself like, um, I'd really like to kind of just talk about witnesses to people, whoever's willing to watch. And so this is like in the mid 2000s, I think. And so I just started making videos about the witnesses, talking about my experiences and talking about what they believed, and just kind of seeing what kind of engagement would be there, because I just got interested in the group. And I'll tell you one reason why I really enjoyed this religion in terms of engaging with them and talking to people about them. I would definitely consider myself more of an introvert. I'm not a very confrontational person. And so I do love to talk about Christianity and religion and the Bible and things like that, and talking about controversial topics as it relates to those things. But it's not my natural inclination to just go out on the street and start engaging with people. That's just not my personality. I want to talk to people who actually want to talk about it and are interested in it. I found that witnesses are very interested in that.
They love talking about their religion, that's for sure.
So it's like it's kind of the low-hanging fruit for people who want to talk. And so I loved that. I didn't have to take off my introvert hat. I could still wear that introvert hat and get along just fine, because they love talking about it. And so just from there, making video content also that I enjoyed talking to the witnesses. I found their beliefs to be very interesting and unique and whatnot. But also, people started coming to me in response to my content and saying, what you're doing is actually helping people. And these are people, and I didn't really have an intended audience per se, or even necessarily like an agenda in terms of who I'm targeting. Um, what people tell me is, "Hey, I'm in the religion right now. None of my family, and we may talk about this, but they would say I'm PMO, physically and mentally out." And so people would start to like bring that to my attention and saying, "Your content is actually really helping me," and it really helped me to wake up and realize there's some really serious problems with this religion. And I'm really glad that you're putting this content out there. It's really helping me. I'm so glad I saw it. Can you keep doing this? That's the kind of feedback I got, and then here we are. Years later, I'm still doing the same thing.
So let's get into what's your take that the religion is a cult? Because there's a lot of conversations. I was Jehovah's Witness. There's the big thing, the sticking point is that the religion is a cult. What's your take on that question?
It really depends on who you ask, because if you ask the witnesses, of course, they're going to say, "Oh, well, no, we're definitely not a cult." And if you ask any cult if they're a cult, it's not a term that
They're
people
not
will
going to say,
proud.
yeah, we're a cult.
Right. Yeah. So it really depends on who you ask, and by that I mean what kind of disciplinary academic person are you asking? So, for example, if you're asking like a sociologist, which is kind of my background, they're going to have like a certain set of criteria that they're going to say, okay, here's the sociological criteria by which we can categorize a group to be a cult. And then you could have the psychological or the psychologists, psychiatrists, and basically the behavioral scientists. They're going to give their certain criteria for a cult. And then you're going to have the theologians. And the theologians are going to have their particular criteria for what's a cult. Then you have the witnesses, and they're going to have their own criteria. I was kind of prepared for this question, so I did pull up the article if we wanted to kind of talk about the specifics. There is an entire article, and anyone can read it. It's on their website, jw.org, and they are answering the question, are Jehovah's Witnesses a cult? And they give a couple of paragraphs in response to that and providing their answer. So we can talk about that if you like. But generally speaking, if we're going to kind of put all of those different academic disciplines together to say, what's a general kind of core set of criteria across the theologian, psychiatrist, psychologist, behavioral scientists, and whatnot, it's going to be, I would say, a couple of things. One of those is a centralized authority, but in particular, do they have a leadership, whether it's a person or a group? Do they have a leadership structure that is unchallengeable? Can't, you're not supposed to challenge them, right? And then, kind of tied to that, you're going to have an element of control. Okay, well, as far as how much or how little control, again, that kind of depends on who you talk to. But the kind of control with witnesses that would be pointed out is really their personal life choices. How much control do they have on their personal life choices? Like, who do they hang out with? Who can they marry? And one big one for witnesses would be like the education. Should you go to college and get a degree? So how much control do they have on those types of areas? One really big one, I'd say probably one of the biggest red flags is how do they restrict the flow of information? Information control is a really big one. So, is a particular group restricted to viewing certain outside information, especially information that could shed a negative light on that particular religious group? And there's also claims of exclusivity, like only we have the truth. No one outside us has the truth. Another really big one, this would be maybe the second biggest red flag, is what happens when you leave this religion? Is there a real cost? Okay, it could be financial costs. It could be something like losing your friends and families. In other words, do you get shunned if you leave this group? Are there penalties for that? So I would say some of those are some of like the big ones. There's more we could lay out, but if we look at the criteria that we just kind of set forth right here, that I think most across the board would agree with, who provide a definition of a cult, I'd say Jehovah's Witnesses check off all the boxes. But I would just want to qualify that and say that calling a group a cult is not necessarily a derogatory term. I mean, no one wants to be called that. It's really just a descriptive term that, of course, is going to have a negative connotation. So I don't think it should be used to name call anybody or anything like that. It's just an identifier so that we know what you're talking about. And so if you go up to Jehovah's Witnesses and ask, "Are you a cult?" they're going to say no, and they're going to give their reasons why. But I would say yes, they are a cult. And just to kind of like apply some self-reflection on that. You could even argue that the early days of Christianity were a cult because you really have like an offshoot. And this would be a certain, they're more the religious criteria of a cult, not so much the control and authority and things like that, but more of a religious cult because a theologian is going to define a cult as a group that deviates from traditional doctrinal mainstream beliefs, if you will. So Christianity was certainly that because in the early days of Christianity, it's an offshoot of Judaism. And so essentially the early Christians were rejecting some of the core tenets of Judaism and kind of starting their own thing, or at least that's how it would have been perceived. And so you could even make the argument that the early Christians were a cult. You wouldn't say that just Christianity as a whole is a cult right now. And there's more reasons we could get into say how that's not the case because it's kind of the mainstream.
Gotcha. So I want to take it back to your research. When you were conducting your research, did you let Jehovah's Witnesses know that you were a student in college? You were doing some research on the organization. Was you, I guess, identify yourself as such, or was it more like a covert kind of conversation that you were having with people?
Great question. It wasn't covert at all. Now, when I approached them initially, of course, I did what research I could online, read a couple of books. I kind of wanted to know a little bit about what I was getting myself into. I was kind of concerned with that maybe they wouldn't want to talk to me. Should I go covert or not? I didn't go covert. I really was completely open. I told them where I was going to school, what my degree program was. I laid my cards out completely on the table. However, I was very clear that this is just academic research. I'm not there to demean them or even publish anything negative. I'm really there to publish what they had to say about their particular beliefs. And so, to my surprise, they were all very, very open to that. They had to sign like an NDA,
NDA.
non-disclosure. Yeah, and
Hmm.
I'd do the same thing. So I unfortunately couldn't make everything public per
Right.
se. So I couldn't do that, and maybe that's one reason why they were willing, knew that none of this would become public information. So yeah, all my cards were laid out on the table.
So did they try to convert you after you were done with your interviews or done with the process?
Certainly, they probably wouldn't have put it that way, but they would. But
They try to educate, they try to have a Bible study with you or try to educate you.
Exactly. So I went back in those days. It was a publication called "What Does the Bible Really Teach?" That was a publication that was being, if you're doing a book study or Bible study with them, that's the publication you study, which kind of goes through systematically all of the different core beliefs of the witness religion. So they would have said, "We just want to share Bible truths with you." That's kind of what they would say. So certainly they did, and I agreed to it. I enjoy talking to them, and I wanted to know more about the religion. I don't like to be in ignorance, and I really found an interest in them. So I really wanted to know from the horse's mouth, what do they believe and why did they believe it? And also, I had my own beliefs, and of course, I wanted to find out what do you believe about this thing I believe and hold to very strongly. What do you think about that? So we did a whole lot of that, and that whole process probably lasted about I'd say 3 or 4 years.
So now in retrospect, what are your thoughts about the religion in general? Do you have any general feelings about the experience or about what you learned?
Yeah. There's so much I could say, but I'm just gonna be very blunt about this. I think this religion can potentially be a dangerous religion, and I know that's kind of a very bold statement, but it's really true, and I'll give you like a couple of really brief reasons why that might be. So it can be dangerous literally in terms of your life. Um, and so what that means is Jehovah's Witnesses have historically, since their inception, really, they have had certain rules concerning certain medical procedures. And the most well-known of those is blood transfusions. And so Jehovah's Witnesses strictly forbid any of their members from having a blood transfusion. In fact, what they would say is no true Christian, no one who calls himself a Christian, should have a blood transfusion. And so, if you're going to be baptized into this religion, you have to comply by that. If you don't comply by that, you will be subject to discipline and ultimately excommunicated and shunned the rest of your life. So it's life and death, quite literally, with this religion. So it's very serious. It's not just simply, oh, they just have a certain set of theological beliefs, although that's true. There's life and death on the line. And even kind of tying off from that, you do have the disfellowshipping and shunning, which can cause just
Psychological
unbelievable.
trauma.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is really dangerous, and that can cause like literally a lifetime of trauma that some people just never recover from. It's truly sad. And so yeah, so I'd say it's a dangerous religion to be, and not that everyone is going to have to go through those things. I mean, God forbid you have to be placed in that situation as a witness where you have to choose life and death, not only for you, possibly your child.
Hmm.
So hopefully no one has to be put in that situation, but people are put in that situation as witnesses. And then with the shunning, God forbid that has to happen to someone. It does happen, and that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg. But because whoever's watching this interview, whether they're religious or not, I think everyone can probably agree those things are dangerous. Maybe that's the common ground here. We can all kind of see any religion who teaches that could be placed in that category.
Certainly so. What about the issue of the false prophecies, like the end of the world prophecies? They're definitely a doomsday high control environment. Is there any sort of red flags you see with them saying the world's going to end on like 1975, I think was one of the dates when they predicted the world would end in the end of times, which they say that we're in right now.
Huge red flags. And if you are a faithful witness, this should at least cause you to kind of take a step back and look at this thing a little more critically, because what they're going to tell you is that not only are we living in the last days, right now, they would say, and I'm nearly quoting verbatim what they would say, we're in the final part of the last of the last of the last days. It sounds like I'm parodying that, but they literally, from the platform on the broadcast, anyone can go look this up for themselves. That is what they say. But they've been saying the same thing for decades. The last official false prophecy or false prediction, can use either term, would have been the 1975 that you mentioned. That one is a slightly, you could say, debatable one, because they kind of said it loud and clear that the end will be in 1975. But as they got kind of closer, they kind of started backtracking a little bit. They're saying, "Oh, this may happen, this may not happen." So that one's a little bit muddy, if you can call it that. Nonetheless, when 1975 did not happen as they said it was going to happen, a lot of people left the religion. But the more clear-cut ones would be the 1914 prophecy, the 1925 prophecy. So they have a really poor track, and there's other ones too. There's 1878, 1879. They have a really poor track record of making predictions that did not come to pass. And so when those things did not come to pass, a lot of people just lost trust. in this religion. It's not a good thing to make predictions like that and be wrong. It's one thing to be wrong. It's one thing to be that wrong in causing people to lose trust. So, kind of fast forwarding to where we are today, it's really a question of, well, if your religion has such a bad track record of falsely predicting the end, why do you trust them now to tell you that the near is soon, whatever that means, right? And there's even a prophecy. It's actually in scripture. It's in Matthew chapter 24. It says, "This generation will not pass away until all these things take place." I think it's Matthew 24:34. Um, they've applied different meanings to that. Okay. And so what they had to do very recently, because what is this generation? Okay. So if it's this generation since 1914, well, how many people are alive that were living in 1914?
Not probably any now.
Right. So what they have to do is they have to redefine what that means. And now we have something called an overlapping generation, which try to wrap your mind around that. It's very difficult to do. It does not make any sense whatsoever, but it's what they have just come up with to buy them more time. And so it's a really question of how much more time can they buy? Telling you that the nearest soon, we're almost there, we're in the final part of the last days. Eventually, enough time has to go by to where you're thinking, okay, I don't think the end is really coming. And this religion's been around for over 100 years, saying the same thing. So something's kind of got to give at some point.
You think so? So it seems like are all of their doctrines based on Bible information then, or is the leaders of the organization kind of taking their scriptures and then making their own rules? Does it seem like?
What they're going to tell you, and you can ask any Jehovah's Witness, you'll see them out on the streets, usually in whatever city you're closest to. You'll see them standing outside on a street corner with the literature carts, and they're just standing there offering their literature. So if anyone would go up to them and say, "What are all of your beliefs based on, including beliefs about prophecy?" It wouldn't take them but 2 seconds to say, "All of our beliefs are based on the Bible." That is what they're going to claim, right? And even if you do look at those claims, so just to give you an example, when they were predicting that 1914 was going to be the end, they were using, or at least quoting, scriptures to back that up. Now, they still do hold to the 1914 date, okay, but for a different event. So Jesus didn't return physically in 1914. Oh, it's an invisible presence, which is, it's convenient to say that. You can find any kind of doomsday prophet to say that, oh, my prediction didn't come true. Oh, it became spiritually true, right? So it
Right.
wasn't. So there's more complex reasoning behind it, but that's in essence what happened. So they were using in the 1900s, before 1914, they were citing scripture to support 1914. But what happened didn't, or 1914 didn't bring about what they said were going to happen. So they would have to admit that they were misapplying the scriptures to support that belief. Now, my opinion, and anyone can search this out for themselves, is that if you take most of their or all of the core doctrines, including prophecies that were in the end times and things like that, they're all misapplications of Scripture. Okay, and so and we can unpack any of those particulars if you'd like, but I would say in a nutshell, yes, it's misapplications of Scripture that their authority structure imposes on all witnesses, and that's a whole nother topic too.
Gotcha. So the last subject that I really want to touch on is the essay topic. It seems like that's been kind of there's the Australian report that came out a few years ago, and there's been other cases in the United States. How much has that been a black eye on the organization, in your opinion?
Oh, it's one of the hardest ones on them that I've seen in my several decades in studying this religion. I've never seen anything like it in terms of just, I like how you put it, giving the organization a black eye. I'm going to call it CSA for short. I want to be
Mhm.
careful with the algorithms, not using the language. I think most people know what we're talking about, CSA. So the Australia Royal Commission, no matter what anyone hears back, and this actually kind of goes back to saying why this religion is dangerous. This is one reason why, and it may even be one of the most important ones, if not the most important, because it concerns children who are the most vulnerable. So I would just encourage anybody who finds any interest whatsoever in what we've been talking about so far is to just take their search engine on the internet, type in Australia Royal Commission Jehovah's Witnesses. Probably the first hit will bring up a report talking about what happened. So I'll briefly summarize it, but in essence, you had at least this is just in Australia, they uncovered at least 1,000 unreported cases. And there's a whole host of reasons why they're unreported. And one of those reasons is that the governing body, which is the leadership structure of the religion, they do not have a mandatory reporting rule. So if you see CSA happening, it's not call the authorities. What they say is um, you can go tell like an elder, or you can call the branch office and say, what are the laws of the land in terms of mandatory reporting? And they may tell you, and this is true, there are countries and maybe states that don't have mandatory reporting. And that's something that's kind of being worked on politically in a lot of these places. But because of that, they have a little bit of a loophole, the witnesses do. And so what they're going to say is, well, we weren't required to report it. And so what happens is they try to investigate it internally. And that's extremely dangerous because the witnesses, they don't have anyone with expertise on how to investigate these kind of things. They're using just people like you and me who might have experience running a congregation or something like that, but we don't have the expertise to figure out how to know if something was really CSA or not. We don't have the expertise to do that, but the authorities do. And so the witnesses don't have those mandatory reporting. They could just make a rule today. The governing body could give a governing body update and say, we have now decided to make a rule saying anytime you might witness or hear about CSA, report it to the authorities. Don't call the branch office first, report it to the authorities. Okay, they could do that, but they haven't. And so they're being taken to court on this, especially in Australia. In fact, this is extremely interesting. Anyone can go on YouTube right now and type in the Australia Royal Commission. I think it's court hearing. And I'm trying to. My mind went blank on which governing body member was on there. But anyway, you can watch this on camera. I think it's almost 2 hours of one of the governing body members basically being questioned and interrogated by an Australian. Is either a lawyer or court official. I can't remember which. It's extremely telling to watch that there. So yeah, fascinating but sad, tragic, dangerous situation. But that might just be the tip of the iceberg with what happened in Australia that could be happening and probably is happening all over the world. We don't know how many. Some have estimated thousands of unreported cases that are out there all over the world within this religion. So this certainly affects the children, and it can potentially be a very dangerous place for children, even though the witnesses will say this is a family friendly organization. You can trust your kids here, anywhere in the world, no matter which congregation you can go to. But I would say, no, that's an extremely naive and dangerous way to think.
We're spending a few minutes with Michael Felker just talking about the Jehovah's Witness religion, which he studied extensively when he was in college. Michael, from your experience, what attracted people to the religion initially?
I think it was the challenging of mainstream Christian beliefs. And I'll give you just like one example of this. Traditionally, historically, for the most part, Christians have taught something like eternal conscious torment in a place called hell, and of course that's something that's very unsettling for many people. And that is one thing that the founder of the religion, Charles Taze Russell, he was heavily challenging that. And not that no one has challenged it before him or thought of these objections, but he was certainly challenging it very heavily. And a lot of people who never thought to question that are thinking, wow, well, that doctrine has always been very unsettling for me. And this person here is offering some really interesting perspectives on that. And so it was things like that that drew people to this religion. And so, and it could even be things like the Trinity, something that a lot of people might have a hard time understanding. And so, Charles Taze Russell is challenging these things, and that just attracted a lot of people. And that's really those kind of things, like challenging core Christian beliefs, things that people just never thought to question. That's one thing that up until I'd say somewhat recent decades, that we can talk statistics at some point if you'd like. But I would say maybe by like the 70s or 80s, I'd have to look it up, so don't hold me to that. Up until those points, people were being attracted to the religion because of the doctrine. Maybe they grew up Catholic, and a lot of these things that Catholics taught, oh, those aren't really making much sense. To me, they never have. I never thought to question it. But Jehovah's Witnesses, oh, wow, they're giving me some really good reasons to question so I think in large part, up until we kind of got to a more of a post-Christian, a little more of a secular society, kind of where we are today, I think it was like doctrinally that really brought a lot of people to the religion. And through those first several decades, they did have, I'd say, exponential growth, and to where now they're numbered in the millions.
Yeah, I want to say too, as we're talking, that I was raised a Jehovah's Witness and that I still have a lot of friends who are good people inherently, though there are some questions about the integrity of the organization, the false prophecies, and some of the doctrines. They seem to be good people who are serving Jehovah, though they may face some other challenges. The religion may face some other challenges. Let me ask you this also. Why is there such a sort of movement for people now speaking out against religion? There's a huge ex-Jehovah's Witness movement. There are people who are speaking out now publicly about their experiences. Why do you think that is?
Now, thanks to social media and the internet, these people now can have a voice, whereas just decades ago, they couldn't really have a voice unless they were fortunate enough to get on like a news channel or something like that, or be a part of a documentary or publish a book. It's just not everyone had that opportunity. But anybody nowadays can hold up a phone to their face, record a video, and publish it, or start a
Record an
website.
interview
Yo, exactly.
with the
So,
Jehovah's Witness researcher.
right. So all these people can now do that, and also thanks to the internet, information is just so easy to spread. When something happens, I mean, we all know within minutes. When something happens, like a scandal or something with the organization, we all know within minutes, and everybody just hooks their cameras up and they start plugging away.
Yeah, I have to say it's been years since I've been affiliated, so I wasn't aware until more recently when I started sort of searching for the content. But it really seems like the beard change they made recently. They recently changed the rules on cheersing or toasting. This really affected people deeply, though.
Absolutely. I just made a video 2 days ago on the toasting, and to be totally honest, I didn't even know that was a rule. And this kind of
Yeah,
goes back to the rules that this religion follows are endless. So yeah, things like beards, and I don't know how. I think the verdict is still out on how many are actually leaving because of the beard thing. But just in case your audience doesn't know, Jehovah's Witnesses did not have a beard until within this last year. And what's really fascinating, I think anybody would be fascinated by this, when they made the announcement, the governing body made the announcement that we now no longer forbid or advise against having a beard. Practically the next day, as fast as any man is able to grow a beard, they all just got beards.
yeah.
It's a very fascinating kind of circumstance there.
I remember when I was a teenager, when I was starting to grow a little dirt on my chin, the brothers would be like, "Are you going to shave?" Or they were like pestering me about it. And my dad really didn't force us to shave, but it was just like one of those sticking points. And I was like, always felt like it was not a scriptural rule. It's just a man-made arbitrary rule. So definitely it's been interesting to me to see how that sort of progressed, definitely.
Yeah, and you can look at any one of those things, and they would have claimed up until last year or recently that they would have claimed that they have a biblical basis for telling people they shouldn't have beards. And now, after they made the change, they will admit we never had a biblical basis for
Mhm.
telling men they couldn't have beards. It's quite, and we could even look at the example of toasting, to where now the governing body is saying we are no longer making a rule against toasting. But why did they have the rule to begin with? Well, it's similar to why they forbid the celebrating of holidays like Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, birthdays, so on and so forth. It's because they see pagan connections with those things. They said the same thing about cheering, which who would have thought that cheering had some sort of pagan connection if you go back far enough, right? But now they've decided, well, no one is toasting because of any kind of pagan reason or some type of supernatural force, or no, nobody is thinking those things when they're toasting. And so the governing body, I don't know why it took so long for them to figure this out, but they decided, okay, we're not going to forbid that anymore. We're going to allow Jehovah's Witnesses to have the freedom to toast if they want to toast.
We spoke a little bit about the practice of disfellowshipping, which I've been researching, like Mormons, Amish. It seems like they all have this sort of shunning culture within the religion. Are these similar type of religions, or were they based on the same foundation, or what's the sort of basis behind the shunning in your take?
Yeah, I've never like researched particularly the Amish and their reasons. If I had to guess, I'd say it's for some of the same reasons. They're going to do it differently and whatnot, but yeah, of course, Jehovah's Witnesses are not the only ones that do that. I mean, you could even find certain Muslims who practice shunning to some degree. The LDS Church, also formerly known as the Mormon Church. A lot of them have some element of shunning, definitely not quite as extreme as the Witnesses or the Amish. But really, what they would say is, of course, they have a biblical basis for shunning. And we can like get into the scriptures on that if you like, but there's one particular one in First Corinthians chapter 5, to where you have a situation in the church to where someone was doing something extremely immoral sexually with a family member, and so Paul the apostle basically advised that this person needs to be excommunicating because what he's doing is just so completely disgusting. Even by just the world standards, anybody would think that what this person was or these people were doing was completely disgusting. So we're going to ask this person, please leave. You're no longer a part of this fellowship, and so yeah, you need to you need to go, right? Within that passage, there's one place where it says, "Do not associate with any so-called brother who engages with these practices." What Paul is saying there, and this is where the witnesses misunderstand, when Paul said those words, that congregation had not yet excommunicated this person. That person is still in their midst practicing the immorality that they're still practicing. So he would have been considered a brother or maybe a so-called brother. So what Paul is saying to the congregation is that until you have gotten this person out of your midst and asked them to leave, don't associate with that person. What witnesses have done with that is they have taken that to mean even after you have asked someone to leave or disassociate from the religion, you need to continue to stop associating with them. So what that turns into is if you leave this religion, no other witness is going to talk to you, fellowship with you, be your friend. None of that. Now, up until very, very recently, you couldn't even give a greeting, not even a hello, to a disfellowshipped person. Were literally to be completely shunned until they came back to the congregation in humble repentance. Even then, even after they come back, there is a whole period that can last months, or
Mhm.
even after that person has come back. And I mean, they could be weeping, crying, just in as much repentance as you can imagine, still, until the elders of the congregation, who are the ones who oversee the congregation, until they say, we're going to let this person back in officially, that person is to be shunned. Now, as far as saying a greeting, just very recently, the governing body decided that it's now okay to give a greeting, a hello, we're glad you're here, that's it, to a disfellowshipped person. Okay, so they've now slightly cracked the door a little bit, loosened it just a little bit, but just a greeting. I mean, that's still that's still horrible, that you can't actually have a relationship with somebody, even if it's a family member, I might add. You still can't do that, and it's really because they have, like many other things, completely misapplied the scriptures.
So it's like the religion is almost tearing families apart in some ways by this shunning practice. I have a question for you. Who is this governing body and why do they have so much power over their members?
Yeah, the governing body was officially established in the 1970s. Prior to that, they had basically a president of the religion. So originally you had Charles Taze Russell. Then after Russell passed away, then you had Joseph Rutherford, and then you had presidents after them. So you didn't formally have anything known as a really a governing body until around the 1970s. So just in a nutshell, a governing body is simply a group of men at the highest level, the highest tiers of the hierarchy, the structure of the religion. So a group of men, I think right now there's 11 total, and that number could be give or take a few men, but it's a group of men who basically tell all nearly 9 million witnesses everything that they must believe, practice, and obey. And that can be even to the most minute things, like whether you can have a beard, right? Things like that. Or can you give a greeting to someone who has left your religion? They just dictate the most minute details of everything that practically everything that you believe in practice. And there's a whole host of reasons behind that. If I can just give like one reason, there's a prophecy in Matthew chapter 24. It's called the prophecy of the faithful and discreet slave. Some Bibles might say the faithful and wise servant. But anyway, there's a couple of verses about a faithful and discreet slave. It says they will give food at the proper time. Um, and so they believe that is talking about the governing body, giving food at the proper time. They interpret that as spiritual food, basically telling people what the Bible says, things like that. So they have really taken that prophecy, stretched it out into this thing that's now known as, and they have other reasons besides that that we could get into, but I'd say that's at the core. If you ask any Jehovah's Witness what the basis of the governing body is, they'd probably point to that prophecy as probably the main one. And so, because of that, they've created this hierarchy structure of these men at the top who, behind closed doors, decide on these matters. And the way they make decisions is very interesting. They're not typically going to make a decision, such as something like beards, until they've all basically unanimously voted that, okay, yes, we're going to make this change. We're gonna make this rule. And so there's much more to it than that. But yeah, the group of men at the top, that is the governing body.
Definitely fits the description of a high control group, definitely, if not a cult, seems like. So what happens to this religion if the end does not come in the next 5 to 10 years? What do you see happening to the members or folks who follow this faith?
Unfortunately, because since they don't actually give years, and you really, it's difficult to really corner them and give them an answer, or to get an answer on this. Like, what does soon really mean? Can you give me a number of years? They're not going to tell you, no matter how hard you press them. So I would say in 5 to 10 years, my guess is they're going to keep on saying the same things. Okay. Now, what could be challenging to them is if a very specific prophecy, if not necessarily a prophecy that's in a certain number of years, but a certain prophecy. I'll just give like one example. Let's say the United Nations completely goes away and there's just no more United Nations anymore. It's replaced by like something else, something completely different. Okay, because Watchtower has a lot to say about the United
United
Nations. And
Nations.
there's
Yep.
also a scandal that happened with that we could talk
Oh, yeah.
talk.
What's this? I haven't heard about the scandal. What's that?
Okay, so Jehovah's Witnesses have a no political involvement rule. We do not get involved in politics. We're
Right.
apolitical, we're politically neutral, we don't vote, we don't salute the flag, no political involvement. The United Nations, they would describe as, I think the beast, the harlot in Revelation, they
Hmm.
make connections with Bible prophecies and say this is about the United Nations. This is very, very bad. Let's just put it that way. United Nations is bad. We don't want anything to do with it. Okay. So they said a lot about it. Anyone can go to their website, type in United Nations. You can find plenty. You can read all day on it, all the negative things they've said about the United Nations. Back a few decades ago, I think during the 90s, um, they became associated with the United Nations as an NGO, which means non-governmental
Organization.
organization.
Yep.
Yeah, anybody can look this up, okay? You can find an official letter from the United Nations. You can find official letters from, or not letters, but you can actually find the newspaper. I think it was the Guardian, I could be wrong, who published basically the leak, if you will. They found out the Watchtower was associated, or the Jehovah's Witnesses were associated in with the United Nations. You can even find an official publication or a letter from the Jehovah's Witnesses responding to the allegations. Okay, so there is a connection. I'll just put it that way. An NGO is a non-governmental organization, but you're still associated with the United Nations. Why? Well, because if you look at the ideals, basically the criteria to where if you become an NGO in association with the United Nations, you have to support the United Nations charters.
Hmm.
And that's all there, cut and dry, point blank. You have to do that. Um, and so that is a scandal. That is a damning scandal because for 10 years they were associated as an NGO until they were exposed by this news outlet. When they exposed them, the Watchtower immediately retracted their membership as an NGO. What they claim is it was just to have access to, I think, one of the libraries at the United Nations. Honestly, it was a sorry excuse. It was the best they could come up with, and they never spoke of it again. It's not published on their website. That association has just been like completely wiped clean, unless you do like a general internet search for it. So they don't talk about it. Most Jehovah's Witnesses don't know about it, except for back then, and still some today when they find out about it. But a lot of people left the religion when they found out about this association. And still, when Jehovah's Witnesses find out about it today, yeah, it's pretty incriminating. I mean, it's like committing adultery. That's how Jehovah's Witnesses view. That's how strong their views on politics are. If you go be associated with something like the United Nations, you're like committing adultery against Jehovah God. I mean, it's just very, very bad. Somehow it was okay for the Watchtower to do it, but if any Jehovah's Witness today did something like that, they would be just disfellowshipped without question.
Definitely. Yep. Definitely. So let's turn to your website and your channel now. Who have you made it for? And I noticed you, like when I found you, I thought you were Jehovah's Witness. So why did you create the channel and who are you serving and what kind of people are you helping through your content?
Yeah, I'd say I have, my audience is anybody who's just willing to watch and listen. I would split maybe my audience into kind of two categories. You have people that have left the religion and they're looking for ways to maybe find things out about their religion and what they teach so they can share it with their friends and family who are still in the organization. Because once you get out and you see just how green the grass is on the other side, you know?
Worldly people are not going to kill you.
Right. Yeah. And they
We
see
are
that
not worldly people are not the devil.
right. And they see that apostates are not typically these evil, mean
Yep.
people. I'm not to say there can't be, but they're not what they're not what the Jehovah's Witnesses have made them out to be. Let's just put it that way. So
Boogeyman. Yep.
yeah, so you have those people who I like to reach and provide them with information that they can share with their family members and friends still in it. Then you have the other side, and that would be the PMOs, those who are physically in, mentally out. Now, as far as how far mentally out there are, that really depends on the person. But a lot of people are in that stage, they really just kind of like wake up, and there could be a whole host of reasons why they wake up. And the waking up could just mean, wow, something is really wrong with this religion. I
Right.
can't totally put my finger on it yet. I need to figure this out. And so what they do is they go out searching wherever they can, most of the time in secret, especially if they're married and they're in a house with the family. They're trying to like keep this information very private. They're trying to uncover. So those people will watch videos, and I have a podcast as well. It's the same thing, but they'll go to podcasts, videos, and I have a website with articles. They'll go to places like that to really search things out and to really try to figure things out because we're telling them, people like me are telling them things that the organization never told them about. And they're finding value in that. And so what they're doing is something that the Watchtower calls independent thinking. Independent thinking is something they expressly forbid. Basically, do not think for yourself or don't think outside of how we tell you you're supposed to think. And that's a very, very fascinating process from a psychological
Yep.
perspective. I've never quite experienced that like anything like that myself because I've never been part of a religion like this and left. I can only kind of imagine what that's like. But it's a very scary thing to do from what people tell me, like kind of really thinking for yourself for the first time and not viewing the world through this lens that the Watchtower has given you. When you take those glasses off and you really get to kind of think for yourself, things really start to unravel. And it can be extremely confusing and difficult and scary and traumatic and all of that. And so they're looking for answers. And so that's something that really I try to provide on my channel. I like to, of course, expose the Watchtower for things they're teaching and doing that are false, but also I like to provide something positive,
Hmm.
especially if they're still considering themselves to be a Christian. They still want to follow the Bible. They still love God. They still want to keep their relationship with God, but they don't know what to believe anymore outside of that. And so I like to kind of show them, hey, here's what the Watchtower teaches about the Bible. But here's actually what the Bible teaches. But I do my best, and I'm not perfect at this, but I try to tell them here's how to think. Not what to think, but here's how to think. Let me show you how to use your natural reasoning abilities to arrive at a conclusion. And so I do my best to do that. Try to be as less biased as possible. I can't hide my biases completely, but I really, really do try my best to kind of get people to read the Bible for themselves. Apart from what any man, whether it's me or the Watchtower or anyone else, just read the Bible for yourself and come to your conclusions on what it says.
I think that last thing really underscores what all Christians should do is read the Bible for themselves, right? Get the information, go straight to the source, because really that's the information that we all should be living by is the Bible at the end of the day.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. That's what I do, and that's what I want the witnesses to do. Unfortunately, they don't do that. They have their own translation. We haven't mentioned that yet,
Well, that's a
but
whole nother that's a whole nother
right,
conversation.
right.
We should have a whole nother video on that. So explain what apologetic is, because I've heard that word tossed around, but I really am not familiar with it. Could you explain that a little bit for me?
Sure. It just means a defense of the faith, and it doesn't have to be anything like, "Oh, I'm getting defensive." It's not really meant to be in that way. There's a verse in First Peter, I think it's First Peter 3:15, that says, "Always be ready to give a defense or an apology for the hope that is within you." So, giving an apology doesn't mean that you're sorry. It's really there's a whole meaning behind it in ancient Greece, to where like a lawyer would make an apology, which means give a defense of something. And so you could even look at it like you're a lawyer. You're in a court setting. You're making a defense for your client. That's kind of what apologetics is defending the truth of your belief.
Gotcha.
And that's
That
not something that is just related to Jehovah's Witnesses. That could be any number of religion that may come to me and say, "Hey, Mike, why are you a Christian? Why do you think the Bible's true? Questions like that." And if you're giving apologetics, just means, okay, I'm going to answer that question.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So I have a few questions that I like to ask all my guests, and I'll sort of kind of try to formulate this towards our conversation here. But what would be your definition of a spiritual awakening in terms of, I guess maybe if you're in the Jehovah's Witness religion, what would that look like?
Yeah, a spiritual
Or an awaken? I guess an awakening is a lot of folks say, yeah, they were awakened from from the truth. What would that look like?
Yeah, I'm going to give you an example that's unfortunately been way overused, but I'm going to use it anyway because I just think it captures the essence of this. It's really just being red pilled. If you can just imagine, I mean, it's not quite like this, but it's not too far off. It's just in the Matrix when Neo basically decides to take the pill, and his reality literally changed before his eyes. He woke
Right.
up and just the world looks vastly different from how it did before. And I don't think I'm exaggerating too much to say that when a witness who was just heavily indoctrinated just to the core. They would have died. They would have not accepted the blood transfusion. To their core, they believed in this religion and they would have died for it. But when they awaken, it's literally like they walk outside and the world now looks completely different. And I don't say that from experience, but that's just how it's described to me. And I've seen people who man, I didn't think this person would ever leave, but
Yep.
they ended up leaving, and that is how it's described to me. I mean, it's practically a miracle in these cases. It's so extreme.
Yeah, it is. So let me ask you this. What's the most valuable lesson have you learned from this religion or from your studies of this religion?
I'd say the most valuable lesson from it is not to try to take things too much into my own hands. And it's tempting to do that. It's I can't control people, and I shouldn't try to control people. I'm not in control over people's decisions, and that's kind of a hard pill to swallow. Um, because I will encounter people and these are Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm just like, if you could only see what I see, right? If you could only see what I see, and you're trying to persuade them and whatnot, and I've just had to learn, and it's a hard lesson to learn. And I still have a lot of work to do in this. I have to really take a step back and let people make up their own minds and let them do that. Let the process work, or better yet, leave it in God's hands. And let that process work. And it's not a process that can be rushed. That's kind of part of this lesson is don't rush that process. It takes witnesses who eventually leave years and years and years, maybe even decades. So it's just don't rush that process. Don't put it in my own hands, let go, and just be the information provider. Okay, provide the information. I try to do so kindly and respectfully and as best I possibly can, and then let people make that own decision. And if they leave the religion, I'm extremely happy about that, especially when they come back to me later and tell me how great of an experience it is leaving that religion. As painful as that experience was, they're so glad that they did it.
There's a whole new world out there. It really is. Last question is, what would be your advice to someone in the organization who is going through an awakening themselves? What would you say to them, or what kind of advice would you give them?
It really depends on who else they have in the religion, whether it's like family or friends.
Hmm.
Because if you want them to kind of see what you see and you want them to leave with you, you have to be extremely cautious in how you approach that because And this goes into the whole PMO thing, physically in, mentally out. If you just awaken and let all your friends and family know, hey, I've woken up, that's not going to go well because
It's not.
you'll get disfellowshipped, and then you've lost your chance
Yep.
to share with those friends and family. So my advice would be careful. Be
Mhm.
careful. If you want your friends and family to leave with you, be careful and approach it extremely delicately. And by that, I mean how you share information, if you're going to share information at all. Sometimes it just means asking them some questions on occasion. Get them to think, just plant little seeds in them. Maybe just in the form of the question. It could even be a question like with the beards, like, so I just noticed they changed the beard policy. Have you ever wondered why they ever had that beard policy to
In the
begin
first
with?
place.
And that's not a overly confrontational question. It's just like a curiosity question, right? And so that's my advice to somebody. Just be careful, approach it very delicately, don't rush. Um, but there's some people who are like, I've just got to get out. I'm so miserable here. I got to get out, and that's fine. Everyone can make that decision for themselves. And there's also a process of doing that to where it's less painful,
Right.
and that could mean trying to avoid having to sit before your elders in what they call a judicial
Judicial
committee,
committee.
which
Right.
is a horrible, horrible. I think it's an inhumane practice, to be frank, but a terrible process. So yeah, avoiding that if you can.
Definitely. Mike, where can people find you online if they want to ask you questions or see your content? Where can they find you?
Probably best place is on my website, michaeljfelker.com. So michaeljfelker.com. That's my website. Through that, you can find my YouTube channel, which is, I believe, it's just MJF, which is my first name, initial, last name, Felker. So MJF Apologetics. If you just search that on YouTube, you'll pull up my YouTube channel. You can also find me on all podcast platforms as well, just by searching my podcast title is called JW Review. So if you just go to like Apple Podcasts or Amazon or Spotify, you can just type in JW Review Podcast and that'll pull that up.
Michael, I want to thank you for your time talking to Michael Felker. Thanks for your research and for providing this kind of unbiased view or your perspectives on the religion. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.